Of course, everyone on this show is familiar with friend of the show, former MSNBC host, former award-winning Bloomberg reporter, also best-selling New York Times author, and now he's part of the weekly podcast called Truth or Skepticism at Tasty Trade. It's Dylan Ratigan. Okay, all right. So where? So now we haven't talked since last Tuesday. And so
we have not talked in 8 days.
So we didn't know.
Things have gotten better. I think that it's nice to see the violence and the riots have settled, and we've moved into sort of massive protests. I even sent you a couple of I see some street party protests like I talked about before this all happened. I was happy to see that.
So you were talking about the protests in Hong Kong. Now, whether you agree with the politics of the protest or not, you were talking about the difference in how they were protesting. You were talking about the Pulse protest, and you were also talking about that it wasn't as angry, or they tried to make it into more of a party. And then, so that seems to be where this is going now. This seems like the looting has calmed down, the violence has calmed down, and it's just big protests. In fact, John Harwood, you sent me this. John Harwood tweeted this out. He said, a remarkable shift outside Lafayette Park. No cops or troops in sight. A new fence was put up to keep protesters further away from the White House, but it has become a shrine and a rallying point. There's music playing, an exuberant mood. So that's what you were calling for, and son of a gun, it's starting to happen. Are you encouraged?
Yeah, I am. I am encouraged. I mean, going back to when we started this conversation in March, you and I both knew that if they continued with the disastrous policy of the lockdown without UBI, without healthcare, hyper-targeting the most impoverished in this country, that we obviously had a biological crisis. We still do. We obviously created an economic crisis as a matter of policy because the government that runs our government is fucking morons. And then because the government chose to create an economic crisis out of the biological crisis, well, they also chose to use it to completely rob the country blind and the greatest wealth transfer upward ever as a matter of policy. And so once you do that, it's inevitable you're going to get social unrest. The risk with social unrest is that it plays out in a really destructive way because of the primal rage that's caused by the looting and destruction from the hypocritical, duplicitous leadership in our government. Not that you can blame people for the primal rage, but the primal rage ultimately is counterproductive, unfortunately. And so the real task, the spiritual task, whether you're Nelson Mandela or whoever, Gandhi, all the sort of really aspirational reformers, is to transmute the primal rage into an ebullience, but an undeniable presence. And my hope is that we will see the transition away from the early violence in the protest movement toward an ebullience and a undeniable, overwhelming, joyous presence that has a very clear set of demands. I think it's unfortunate that right now, I understand why defund police has taken off. It's being in favor of getting rid of something is a logical and understandable thing, especially something that's as abusive and over militarized and all the problems that exist with American policing style. But ultimately, it's still an act of destruction as opposed to an act of creation. And so hopefully this will continue to evolve to be not only away from violence, but and towards that sort of overwhelming, joyous, ebullience presence in the street. And it's a fun summer in that context. But to move through that into using that energy to be for things as opposed to just against things, which hopefully that'll be the last step.
So right now it seems like the neoliberals are doing their best to hijack this, which is what they do. They co-opt it and they try to placate the protesters. And that's what the African scarves are all about. That's what the Congress people kneel, the Democrats kneeling for 8.5 minutes. These are all symbolic gestures, right, to placate people. Do you think that anything significant? I don't see anything.
Not yet. Obviously, not yet. But I think that hopefully this will sustain itself in a positive in a positive iteration. And hopefully, not only is Donald Trump voted out of office, not only is Mitch McConnell voted out of office, but hopefully Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer. I mean, if there was ever a year to eliminate all of these people, this is it. Nancy Pelosi has to go, as far as I'm concerned, just as much as Donald Trump has to go, just as much as Chuck Schumer has to go, just as much as Mitch McConnell has to go. They collectively have failed this country at a catastrophic level. And they love to blame the other person for the problems, but they are collectively responsible 1,000 ways, and this country deserves better.
I couldn't agree with you more.
I guess to answer your question, I'm sure they're going to try to do. I read an interesting metaphor for the Democrats. I forget where it was. Maybe it was one of the magazines or something. Did an excerpt of Waiting for Godot. And it was, I forget who the characters were, but it was, shall we go now? And then the other character says, yes, let's go. And then neither one of them leaves. And that's the Democrats. It's, oh, well, we're going to reform the police now. Yes. And shall we reform the police? And they say, absolutely, we're going to reform the police. And then they do nothing.
Right.
That's how they treat. The Democrats are waiting for Godot. They say, you get Barack Obama as the ultimate example. You know, all of the promises, all of the words, and absolutely positively no action other than using the words to cover up the largest theft in the history of the world before the CARES Act and all the things that happened this year, which he covered up on behalf of the banks, and then the largest forced purchase into an unreformed monopoly that enslaves people to their jobs for health care. While claiming that he was reforming a healthcare system where he didn't reform the monopolies, he didn't reform the employer-based system, he didn't create a public healthcare system, he did no reform other than to pass a mandate to force everybody to enrich the monopoly private health insurers, but called it reform. Barack Obama may have been the single most masterful verbalizer of what people wanted to hear and feel while doing absolutely the opposite of that. Which creates a violent rage when people finally figure it out, even if it takes them a few years.
So I figured it out, and people who got kicked out of their house figured it out. But I don't think most of the people who vote Democrat, I don't know. Some people did figure. Again, I go back to the reason why we have Trump is because just enough people did figure it out, and they wouldn't come out to vote for that anymore, and they knew it was hopeless. I mean, once you get a guy like Barack Obama, a black guy with a Muslim name, and he legislates exactly like Mitt Romney, what hope do people have?
I mean, I can't think of a better year for, instead of being Democrat, Republican, are you going to vote for the Democrat or Republican? If I was to advocate a voting strategy for 2020, it would be to vote out every incumbent. Don't whoever's in there now, don't vote for him. Fuck them.
I couldn't.
Fuck you.
I agree, because they screwed us with the CARES Act in a bipartisan manner. 96-0 it passed in the Senate, and it passed unanimously with a voice vote in the House. So they're all screwing us again as hard as they can, and all they're giving us is lip service and African scarves, and Trump is promising more. I mean, the fact that it's going to even be a nail biter with Trump is being unbelievably authoritarian. I did a video about this. You know, conservatives are supposed to like liberty and get, don't tread on me and get the government's boot off my neck. And yet here they are wanting the military to come in and stop people from expressing their First Amendment rights. That the irony of that is lost on them, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's much the same as people hated George Bush using drones to assassinate wedding parties in the Middle East, but they were very happy to have Barack Obama do it. The problem with so many of American politics is that there actually there's no loyalty to the Constitution. There's no values of any kind regarding anything. There's little more than the belief that if your guy is doing it, it's okay, and if their guy is doing it, it's the worst thing that's ever happened. The Constitution is used as a convenient weapon for political opposition, but I would say the vast majority of the partisans, which again, thank God most of us in America are not partisans, right? Most of us are people who either don't vote or vote independent or don't participate with either of those two parties. Remember, each party individually doesn't represent more than 25% of the voting population, and even in the presidential elections, the largest voting bloc in the country, which is, let's say, 60% of the eligible voters vote, and 30% go left, 30% go right, and 40%, which is the biggest voting bloc, doesn't vote at all. And so I think we have to be careful in terms of disparaging the abomination that is the American political establishment and assigning that abomination to the American identity, because I actually do believe the American people are vastly more aware. They're just hostage to a situation that they don't know what to do, because the two political parties have created such a thorough and suffocating lock on access to political power in this country through layers and layers and layers of systems and primaries and gerrymandering and financing and on and on and on, and access to the debate stages and all these things that they control. But I think that one thing that, when I would become terribly hopeless, especially when I used to do this all the time for a living, I would then actually realize when I look at the statistics that actually I'm in the majority. You're in the majority, Jimmy. Most people in this country know that both of these political parties are nothing more than thieving scum.
Oh, okay. Yeah, when you look at it like that, I hope so. I hope that's the reason why the largest voting bloc in America is the people who don't vote, because they feel, they see through it. I hope that's it.
So anyway, that's why I would say this is a year to vote out all the incumbents. I mean, I know it sounds like a cliche, but for sure, Pelosi, Schumer, Trump, McConnell, those four should be tossed immediately.
Well, the only problem is you got to vote for another Republican or another Democrat to get rid of them, and that's that. And
then vote them out in 2 years again. Just keep tossing people. Just keep tossing.
I mean,
always vote against the incumbent would be my rule for now.
Okay. I mean, we see these.
I mean, I recognize that's a weak solution. There's all the other reform things we've talked about: open primaries, ranked choice voting, et cetera.
Right.
But it's. I don't know what to tell you. Nancy Pelosi does not deserve her job any more than Donald Trump does. I'll tell you that much.
I say it's even worse again, because the media runs cover for Nancy Pelosi and they pretend that she's actually opposing Donald Trump. She doesn't get half the vitriol or even a tenth of it that Donald Trump gets. And she's the one facilitating it. She's the one making it happen. She's the one pulling the strings. While grandstanding as his condescending judger and opponent. Yes, exactly right. All right, so let me just ask you real quick a couple of things. Did you see where AMC, the movie theater AMC, which has IMAX, they say they're going to open almost all of their U.S. theaters in July? So does that mean
a surprise?
So what is that? Is that what is the ramifications of that and implications?
Well, I mean, I think that, what we have to understand is where we are, like going back to the real base analytical part of the process, going back to March. The virus doesn't care about any of this, right? The virus is functioning on math. And if if each person that has the virus gives it to more than one person, the virus is spreading. That's that R score we've talked about. If the number of people that have the virus give it to less than one person, it's less, right? Well, the number of states with an R score that's above 1 6 weeks ago was 7 states. The number of states that have an R score above 1 now is 15 states. California, as you probably know, has the highest level of cases that it's had since this whole thing began. There's another 15 states like that. But we're in the unfortunate situation where because they did the lockdown so poorly, locking people in without any UBI, which then ultimately hyper-targets largely minority urban populations in terms of their economic damage and their vulnerability to the virus, and then flipping on no one leave their house to go outside and protest. So your grandmother dies and you can't go to a funeral, but all of a sudden you can go out and protest. So now the credibility of the government to actually manage the population or have any leadership with the population to moderate their behavior in any way has been completely obliterated. And so any business that wants to open will open, AMC or anybody else. But at the same time, the virus is gaining momentum right now in this country, not losing momentum. And so I suspect what will happen is a massive, massive second wave of deaths in this country. That will be unlike any other country in the world other than maybe Brazil because of the abject stupidity of this country.
So
And so the movie theaters will be great places to spread the virus, I guess. Nice shared air system, interior, all the things.
Do you think? Yeah, I mean,
but there's no basis to tell them not to. How they've lost all credibility to lock people up, and locking people up without any income is maybe it's vastly more damaging. So, I mean, this United States is a tutorial in failed leadership that the only competition that I can see is Bolsonaro in Brazil and maybe Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom in terms of who is the most negligent and ultimately murderous in their decision making. It would be a competition between all of those, with the irony being Andrew Cuomo's sort of position as this great leader, as the one who supervised the greatest killing field of the entire virus so far, by denying that it exists and then sending the people that had the virus back into the nursing homes.
So,
but again, you can't stop these people from opening their businesses, Jimmy. You've lost all credibility. They've lost all credibility.
And so tell me that, what did you say about Andrew Cuomo sending people back into the nursing home? How did I miss that? What happened?
Oh yeah, you missed that? Oh yeah. A huge percentage of the deaths in New York were a function of Andrew Cuomo authorizing the release of known positive coronavirus cases back into nursing homes so that it could be spread around as a super spreader inside of the nursing home, while at the same time, signing a law exempting all nursing home management from any liability for that, because they made the financial contribution.
That's right.
You knew that one.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot. I did. That's right. That's
a good one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one.
It's a good one. And he's really popular, too. I mean, he was masterful, really.
Yes. Oh, my God. Brilliant. Like Goebbels.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
He had the whole press corps, kneeling at his feet. He had everybody singing his praises, but celebrities saying he should be president. It is amazing. It was really what a snow job. And right now,
meanwhile, your governor in California, and then for sure the governor up in Washington State, for the early chapter, actually did a vastly better job than Cuomo in terms of early intervention. I mean, we'll see what happens now. Again, the ability to press the lockdown now has really been forfeited, in my opinion, because of the protests. Mm-hmm. And not because of the protests, but because of the open support of the protests after the grossly mismanaged lockdown, which came with no economic support.
Right.
Which the lockdown was used as a way to steal everybody's money and destroy all the small businesses, but then they're in favor of protests, which means what? So how then can I not have professional sports and movie theaters? It doesn't make you don't have any ground to stand on, which then unfortunately means that the virus will reaccelerate meaningfully and kill a lot more people.
I know. Okay. So right now, Arizona is having an uncontrolled outbreak right now and of coronavirus, and Trump says he's restarting rallies in Oklahoma, Florida, and Arizona, and North Carolina. So, yeah, there's no way. So this is
what's to stop him. The lockdown's a gone thing. I mean, he was against the lockdown the whole time anyway, but now there's no basis to resist it after you've loaded the gun the past few months and all the layers of hypocrisy. So now it's not going to be until you just have. Remember, the second wave of the Spanish flu was 10 times the first wave.
Yeah. So that's what's going to happen right now, right?
Well, I don't know, but we're certainly increasing the probability of that for sure.
So, we got lucky in a sense that it was only horrible in New York City, really. And the hospitals didn't really get overwhelmed anywhere else in the country. But I think now we're going to see that. We're going to see a lot of overwhelming happening.
Seems much more likely than ever.
That's my prediction. Anyway, I want to just one more thing. Matt Stoller today tweeted out, and I just want to get your response to this. He says, "I don't understand the consensus that the Fed had to bail out the stock market. No, it didn't. Its actions have been catastrophic. If it hadn't gone way outside of its political mandate, Congress would have done much more. The Paycheck Protection Program saved a lot of businesses, hospital financing structured health care, and unemployment insurance boosted incomes. Congress acted, and it was far more democratic and egalitarian than what the Fed did by buying junk bonds. So what do you make of that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's no question what Matt is saying is correct. So the Fed's role stepping in to ensure the orderly function of the banking system and the flow of payments was essential to not creating a massive credit contraction and a fourth crisis as again, a financial crisis, the inability to actually fund and secure payments. But everything beyond that was really a political decision designed to ensure massive updraft in wealth to a very small number of people. But what Matt doesn't acknowledge in that, although he surely knows, is that if they made it as a matter of policy, then they would have had to make a policy to take all the money and give it to the rich people. But if they do it through the Federal Reserve, I mean, they're buying junk bonds, they're buying ETFs, they're buying anything they want. Then it's sort of done in a more sinister, duplicitous, and hidden way, which makes it easier to steal the money.
Right. So he's saying that, is he talking about you're talking about the money they passed in the CARES Act, which had the $500 billion, and then the Fed can.
No, he's talking about the trillions that were created at the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
To buy bonds across the board, and then ultimately they're buying stocks and other things. And Matt's point is the fact that they allowed them to use those trillions of dollars to buy as much as they wanted of whatever they wanted created this appearance of this really robust stock market, which is on highs. Whereas if they simply stabilized the flow of payments but hadn't stepped in to buy junk bonds, hadn't stepped in to buy ETFs and these sorts of things, then the distress in the economy would have been more reflected in the stock market. It wouldn't have given the stock market all that morphine we've talked about,
right?
Which then would have been much more of a catalyst for meaningful political intervention. But because the Fed did what it did, the catalyst for political intervention subsided.
So it's kind of like what the Fed did was kind of put a cover over what was actually happening in the real economy, so the government didn't have to really act to do anything, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's what. Okay, so just to make it clear, so the Congress isn't really doing anything to fix the real economy because the Fed kind of put the stock market on the morphine.
Exactly. That's what Matt's saying.
Okay.
And that the Fed has really broadly put it on morphine in a way that has removed the political pressure on the government to do anything for anybody, other than the rich people who own the 80% of the financial assets.
And what are you And what are you keeping what are you as a financial guy? What are you and your friends talking about this week?
I mean, we're talking about the absurdity of a market that's at all-time record highs. Apple's at an all-time record high, Tesla's at an all-time record high, the Nasdaq's at an all-time record high, at a time when the small business economy has been annihilated. These mega companies are making more money and have a higher stock market value than they've ever had, at a time when small business has never been more distressed.
Yes. So,
and just stunning to see that you would have new record highs in stock prices for the biggest companies at a time when the smallest companies in America have been annihilated as a matter of policy.
I mean, I can just see that going into a documentary. As the stock market climbs, they're just showing the empty storefronts and places closing, and 40 million people unemployed, the highest unemployment since the Great Depression, and the Nasdaq's hitting records. I mean, that kind of disconnect in the mechanisms that the government has set up to deal with the crisis is just laid bare to exactly what you call it is a rapacious oligarchy. They have the money to fix things, and they know how to implement systems that make them go on a tripwire. But the tripwire is there to steal money and funnel it upward, not there to actually help the country.
But they will kneel and wear a scarf. Well said.
Wow. Well, Dylan Ratigan, Corona Money Talk for another week. That was fantastic. Thank you. Anything else? Anything that you wanted to say? I didn't bring
I think
up?
I've said my piece. I mean, I'm honored to be on the same show with you early with Jesse Ventura. So I'm just happy to be here.
Hey, did you hear China's going to ditch the dollar?
I mean, they've always been saying that. I don't know. The talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. That's easier said than done.
Okay. All right. When do you
Remember,
think?
79% of the world's assets are in U.S. dollars, and the migrate to ditch the dollar is suicide for everybody, including China. It's like a mutually assured destruction thing.
Oh, really?
So it's very difficult to do that. Very difficult. That's why the U.S. can be so abusive in its financial policies, because they've got the world hostage with the U.S. dollar. I'm sure China would love to do that, but wanting to do something and being able, we would also like to have more than two political parties.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
Okay,
everybody check out Dylan Ratigan on Truth or Skepticism at Tasty Trade with Tom Sosnoff. Dylan, thank you again. Always great to talk to you. Appreciate your insight.
Pleasure. All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay, buddy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, this is the part where I tell you where our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then I would tell you to go join our premium, but nobody has a fucking job. So why don't you just enjoy the video?